occupation of working on an oil rig is widely recognised as a perilous one, involving enduring harsh weather conditions, risky travel to reach the workplace, handling hazardous materials and facing dangerous working environments. The individuals employed in this field undergo rigorous training and are well prepared for various contingencies. However, it is unlikely that a complete overturning of a 10,000-ton oil rig would be considered a possible scenario. Surprisingly, on the evening of March 27, 1980, in the midst of the North Sea, hundreds of miles away from land, this exact event occurred. The Alexander Kielland, an offshore platform constructed by the French company CFEM in Dunkirk for the Norwegian Stavanger Drilling Company, was involved in this incident. Built between 1969 and 1976, it possessed a pentagonal design and functioned as a semi-submersible platform. The platform consisted of 5 massive pontoon legs interconnected by a series of colossal steel tubes forming an immense floating structure. These types of vessels served multiple purposes, including drilling rigs, heavy cranes, service rigs and accommodation units. Standing at a towering height of over 300 feet, the Alexander Kielland primarily served as an accommodation facility, often referred to as a flotel or floating hotel. Consequently, its personnel capacity had been expanded from the original 80 to approximately 350 individuals. However, the original 200-ton drilling derrick remained in place on the top deck. On March 27, 1980, the platform was stationed in the Ekofisk oil field, situated around 160 miles east of the Scottish port of Dundee, effectively positioning it in the heart of the North Sea. The climate in the area can be harsh and unforgiving, characterised by cold, grey seas, large waves, driving rain and low temperatures. The platform was originally used as a service and accommodation facility for the crew of the drilling rig Edda. It was anchored next to Edda and, at that time, had just taken on board the off-duty crew along with the support staff, making a total of 212 people on the Alexander Kielland. Unfortunately, the weather conditions that evening were quite unpleasant, with strong winds reaching up to 70 miles per hour, resulting in waves measuring 40 to 50 feet. Additionally, heavy rain and mist added to the unfavourable conditions. Due to these circumstances, the connecting bridge was removed and the Alexander Kielland was positioned a short distance away from the Edda, where it will remain until the next shift change. At around 6:30 in the evening, the crew members on board the Alexander Kielland were trying to relax. Some were having their meals in the cafeteria, while others were reading, playing cards in their cabins or watching a movie in one of the 2 theatres on board. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed throughout the rig. Initially, many assumed it was just a large wave hitting the deck, but 2 more loud bangs quickly followed. Without any warning, the entire structure suddenly tilted and lurched sharply to one side. Inside, people and objects were violently thrown around. Dazed and uncertain about what was happening, the men found themselves in a world that seemed to be tilting on its side. Doorways, which were now tantalisingly above them and out of reach, became inaccessible due to the slippery, slanted floor, making it difficult to escape. Those who managed to reach the corridors scrambled to gain access to the outside decks, where the lifeboats were located. Jan Jansen, a 23-year-old who was on board that night, vividly remembered the chaos. "I came out into a corridor and worked my way upwards. Some were panicking, screams were heard, some men had fallen and hurt themselves, and we were all scared. I was able to press open an emergency exit, a steel door. It had to be pushed upwards, and that was very, very heavy. At last, getting it open, I climbed out onto the slippery deck." The weather conditions outside were severe, with the air temperature recorded at 5 degrees Celsius, approximately 41 degrees Fahrenheit. However, due to the wind chill factor, it must have felt significantly colder. The surroundings were dark and foggy. The heavy rain relentlessly battered the men as they desperately climbed up the tilted deck. The rough seas continued to pound against the unstable rig, causing the entire structure to sway and jerk violently in the midst of the storm. Unfortunately, 3 out of the 7 lifeboats on the rig had been crushed and lost when the platform tilted, leaving the remaining ones wedged against the upper side of the tilted structure. Despite the perilous situation, some men attempted to lower themselves into one of the lifeboats, but tragically it ended in disaster. The lifeboat was smashed against the platform, and only one of the men on board managed to survive. As time passed, the platform continued to tilt, with the deck becoming increasingly steep. In an attempt to escape, men broke windows and climbed onto the outer walls of the accommodation block. With the lifeboats rendered useless and uncertainty surrounding the deployment of survival rafts, the only options seemed to be to hold on and hope for rescue, or to jump into the icy sea and attempt to swim to the nearby Edda drilling rig. From the vantage point on the top deck, the men could see that some of the massive pontoon legs were now fully exposed above the water. The only thing preventing the entire platform from flipping over was a single remaining anchor cable. Eventually, the strain became too much, and 15 minutes after the initial failure, the last anchor cable snapped, causing the entire 10,000-ton Alexander Kielland to flip over completely. This catastrophic event flung men into the freezing sea and trapped others 50 metres below the surface in the now submerged accommodation block. Men were struggling in the frigid water, relying solely on basic life jackets to stay afloat. The powerful winds and icy rain necessitated a swift rescue if they were to have any chance of survival. A lifeboat from the Alexander Kielland broke free from the sunken rig and floated upside down to the surface. Some stranded men nearby managed to flip the boat over and climb inside, successfully rescuing approximately 19 individuals. The crew members of the Edda threw life rafts into the water, saving more of the stranded men. 7 men were able to swim to the Edda and were brought aboard using rescue baskets. As news of the disaster spread through ship radios, sailors and airmen arrived in the area to participate in the rescue mission. This became the largest rescue operation ever conducted in the North Sea, involving 2,000 men, 47 vessels and 24 helicopters and planes. By morning, the devastating toll became apparent. Out of 212 people aboard the Alexander Kielland, only 89 were rescued, leaving 123 men lost at sea. This incident marked the worst maritime disaster in the history of the North Sea at that time. While the traumatised survivors were swiftly airlifted to other rigs and then back to shore, the focus shifted to determining the cause of such a massive rig capsizing. When the weather finally improved and visibility cleared, it became evident what had transpired. One of the colossal pontoon legs had snapped off during the storm, completely detaching from the rig. Without any fail-safe mechanism for such a catastrophic structural failure, the top-heavy platform immediately began to tilt violently, causing the submerged parts of the rig to take on more water and exacerbate the angle of the tilt. The inevitability of the capsize was evident, as the sole anchor cable that remained intact was the only thing preventing it. Without the 15-minute window provided by the cable, it is highly unlikely that anyone would have been able to escape from the Alexander Kielland. A subsequent investigation determined that a poorly fabricated weld on support pipe D6 had caused a small crack to form. Over time, this crack gradually extended until, during the storm, it ultimately caused the support tube to completely shear off. The resulting strain on the other supports led to a chain reaction of stress failures, resulting in the complete detachment of the massive D-leg of the rig. In addition to the evident flaws in the rig's design and construction, the disaster revealed numerous other shortcomings. The Alexander Kielland lacked any form of emergency preparedness. Once the crew realised they were in danger, it was every man for himself. There was no coordination for evacuating the rig or organising efforts to rescue trapped crew members. The crew stationed on the accommodation platform had minimal safety training, as it was believed that they did not require it. There was a notable absence of survival suits, with the crew only having life jackets that offered no protection against the harsh elements. Many of the survivors of the initial capsize succumbed to hypothermia in the frigid waters. The lifeboats became stuck when the rig tilted, as they were designed to remain in place under load and could not be released. The inflatable life rafts had a capacity for 400 people, but nobody on board knew how to deploy them. The standby vessels were located too far away, with the closest one taking over an hour to arrive. In hindsight, it is evident that a structural failure of this magnitude had not been anticipated, resulting in a lack of preparedness. When the disaster occurred, it became imperative to inspect all rigs of this design urgently and to completely overhaul the emergency procedures and equipment. Salvage divers were then deployed to search the sunken wreck and retrieve the bodies of the drowned crew. Over 50 bodies were recovered from inside the wreck. The overturned rig was eventually towed back to Norway in 1983, where it was flipped back over and refloated. A thorough search of the interior led to the removal of the last 6 bodies for burial. The wreck was later moved to the Nedstrand Fjord and scuttled. Many of the issues highlighted from the Kielland disaster have since been addressed and valuable lessons have been learned. A memorial was erected in March 1986 to honour the victims, with hundreds of people attending the ceremony, including survivors of the tragedy. While time may have eased the pain for some, many survivors never returned to the sea. The harrowing experience of that night for those who made it back, and the grief of the families who lost their loved ones, is truly unimaginable.